Welcome to Adobe Think Tank, Future of Experience Makers. I'm Ray Wong, founder and CEO of Constellation Research, and your moderator for today's session. We are live here in Las Vegas at Freshwater Studios, and more importantly, we are here to talk about what's happening in the world of experience and experience makers. You can follow us on the hashtag AdobeTT, and more importantly, you can actually connect with us, ask your questions, give us your comments, and we'll respond to you along the areas. We have three areas that are important here today that we're going to talk about in three sections. We're talking about emergent technology, we're talking about personalization, and design-led thinking. All three of these topics are going to be addressed by the experts in this room. We're going to do some quick introductions, and we'll talk a little bit about some personal experiences we had last night. So let's start with Malta. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Ray. Thanks for having me. My name is Malta Sigurdsson. I am head of design at Stripe, and I'm based in San Francisco. I'm happy to be visiting here.
Welcome. Go ahead, Giles.
Hi, everyone. I'm Giles Richardson. I lead digital journeys at T-Mobile US, and I'm based in Seattle.
Kelly.
Hi, Kelly Soligan, General Manager of Marketing for Microsoft Stores, and I'm also based in Seattle.
Cecilia.
Hello, Cecilia Faruqi. I lead digital design for Equinox Fitness, based in New York City.
Jared.
Jared Zogby, Global Lead for Personalization at Accenture Interactive and based in Austin, Texas.
Penny.
Great to be here, Ray. Thank you. I'm Penny Wilson. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Hootsuite, and I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Coy.
My name's Coy Vin. I'm Principal Designer at Adobe, and I'm based in New York. Thanks for having me.
Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Steinley with Adobe. I lead web strategy for our digital experience business, and I live in Park City, Utah.
Wonderful. Leland.
Leland Mashmeyer, Chief Creative Officer of Chobani, hailing from New York.
So we're talking about experience, and when we think about what's been happening, when we think about brands and organizations, experiences are changing exactly how the brands are reflected in their mission and their purpose. There are multiple factors that are coming together. Last night we were at the home of Wayne Newton, where we actually had Mr. Las Vegas in front of us, and truly a personal experience. And some of the things that he shared with us really reflect some of the conversations that we're going to have today. It was truly an experience at Casa de Sandinoa, and more importantly, we can start with that. So let's start talking about emerging technologies and what's happening there. Who's got some opening statements to start with?
I'll start.
All right.
So we talked about Internet of Things, quantum computing, bots, mixed reality, and really one of the things that we felt strongly about was that AI is really going to maximize human performance, and that by 2020 it will be absolute table stakes for any company, and it'll be used across a lot of those emerging technologies. So I'm wondering.
I think that was one of the interesting bits when we pivoted in the middle of the conversation, because before it was normally AI was used when it's in a customer contact sense to say, well, let's get rid of a lot, and AI can cope with the more mundane stuff and then leave the really good stuff to humans to do. And I think as we got talking and saying, actually AI has a role in making humans better.
Mm-hmm. Right, and one of the things that we were looking at also was how much perhaps automation do people want, and if you take, say, a service scenario, let's say you're coming into a hotel, or no, let's say you're on the phone, right? If AI could recognize the context of the tone of your voice, use natural language processing to understand sort of what's going on with your need, and provide that context to a human before the human gets on the phone with you. So AI is basically sensing, synthesizing, and then coaching the human so that when the service person gets on the phone, they can do a much better job of giving you what you need, and that's going to be good for the consumer, and it's going to be good for that brand as well. And so it's really that combination of AI plus the human execution in the end that we think will really raise the bar for what businesses need to be providing and what people are going to expect from all of their interactions with different companies.
So Wendy, Penny, Giles, are you talking about the fact that we're augmenting humanity, not replacing it?
Absolutely. I think it's a fallacy to think that AI is going to replace people. AI is going to get a customer to a human being who's qualified to respond faster, and it's also going to let us as individuals learn faster and learn quicker and be more educated about what we are trying to provide.
I think we got to the stage where when we discussed emerging technologies, there's a lot. And I think we started to try and chunk them down to have a good conversation about it. And we said that there's, within there, that you've got inputs, so you've got lots of biometric stuff, lots of voice stuff, which is an input. You've got a whole swathe of stuff which is really around enabling, sort of quantum computing and a blockchain were enablers for stuff. And then you had the experience bits, which were augmented reality and things like that, which were how it would manifest itself. So I think we chunked it down a little bit to enable us to talk in a more intelligent way about it. And then after talking about voice for a while, we then immediately all started writing.
It is interesting. That's right. That's where we still go, right? But we talked about, wouldn't it be great if, I spend a lot of time building PowerPoint presentations, and I think about the time that I spend being like, give me a box, now turn it this color, now give me a shot. Like, there's a lot of this stuff where if I could just take what's in my brain and make it happen, I would save so much more time and I could focus my brain on the strategy. And the idea is, wouldn't it be great if you could take voice plus AI plus the ability to interface with applications, you bring these things together, it can really change the face of what a workday even means for a knowledge worker like we all are. And that can, again, it's going to automate the things where I am not adding value. I know in the workplace we try to focus on, and I as a manager think about this all the time, what are the things that only I can do? I need to focus my time there, and I need to let other people on my team do the things that they can do. I think about AI in the same way. What are the things that something else can do so I can focus on only the things I can do? I can be so much more productive as an Adobe employee and be able to focus my energy on learning and growing in ways that, I'm not being slowed down by changing the color of a text box.
We talked about, automatic PowerPoint. Microsoft right here, right?
Self-driving.
Yeah, you tell the story and then it just outputs the deck rather than doing
Self-driving applications take place.
Yeah, so much better.
And
We also talked about the opportunity for organizations that have a lot, like in retail or like McDonald's, if you have a lot of employees that have to be educated on a specific topic, AI can bring that topic to life for those people. They don't have to remember every single thing. So it's almost like an enhancement for memory and for learning and for education.
It can also help scale. Adobe's got this great demo that we use our Creative Cloud technologies to show. Let's just say there's a scenario where there's a photo shoot, say it's a new movie trailer or the movie poster, right? And they've got 1,000 photos from the photo shoot, but the creative brief says, we need, on this image, we need a woman, she needs to be looking to the left, we want a neutral tone on her face, and it needs to be cropped from shoulders up. But your photo shoot, you got 1,000 photos. Today, we pay highly skilled people to go find all the right photos, crop all the right photos, find the ones where her head is turned the right way. You can use AI to do all of those things I just talked about. That's where the automation comes in. So then you use your creative talent to really enhance the photo to get it exactly how you need it for the context you're looking for. So when we talk about the question of automation to enhance human capability, there's so many applications if you can just think about things where it doesn't take the full intelligence of the person to do. Let AI do it for you. Scale.
Yeah.
Now, you guys came up with some interesting questions for the rest of the audience. What do you want to ask and tap into?
I think there's something around, so when we chunked it down, we said there's going to be lots of inputs now. Emerging technologies providing lots of data inputs. And one of the things that we hit on was that there's likely to be, within the next, whatever period, almost an emerging job, if you like, which would be around identity management for people, where you would then say, I'm in a situation where I'm being asked to make decisions about like what data I share with who, and I don't feel qualified to give the right answers. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. So I'm going to outsource the whole thing to someone who's going to manage my identity. And that becomes a sort of a platform, a job layer that didn't exist before. And I think, whatever your flavor, your flavor would be anonymity, I guess, from our conversations earlier. But it could be that you just say, I want to curate it. I want a better version of me. I want to enable the sharing of data between my cell phone provider and my car insurance company to give me better discount rates because they can see I drive normally.
Interesting, because that's not too far from what you saw with credit scoring, right? Where they would give you coaching and you could do things to improve your credit score, but to your point, more holistic across the whole.
Well, I think pimp my profile, make me a better version of me. I'm going to outsource it, and so that I want to be. We know that companies are going to get much more astute at sort of, picking right customers and influencers to do this thing. So say, right, make me that influencer, and get me cheaper stuff, newer stuff, better stuff, because I've outsourced that to someone who's much more skilled to do so.
Is it about the profile being a better version of themselves, or about being a more accurate version of themselves?
I think it's a more controlled version of yourself. So you pick your flavor. Yeah, I wish to know.
Can I have a fantasy version of myself?
It could be. You could also like just decide that, we use the example of, I used to be passionate about fishing, and I don't really want to know about fishing anymore. I want to know about kite surfing. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of change and modify your profile so that people can tailor things more directly to what you're interested in today versus maybe what's being dragged along with you.
I think there's a bit where, and it moves into then, once you have this control, like the execution. So one of our predictions that we came up with is that many people will have their own pre-configured bots that execute their wishes.
Yeah.
So, I've got 3 wonderful sons. If I ask them what's their best thing that they could get, they would want to get in on the latest drop of certain fashion brands that mean a lot to them. And the trick of doing that is to be able to sort of execute something exactly the right time. As soon as it drops, it's sold out within 10 seconds. If you've got it, it's not a price point thing, it's a immediacy thing. Mm-hmm. That would mean more to them than lots and lots of things. So, to be able to get that experience as soon as it's open, to get your reaction out there as soon as something happens, to be able to get that hard to get purchase, I think more people will start to pre-configure their bots to execute their wishes. So
I thought you were going to say your sons were going to be using a bot to answer, how was your day at school, and
yeah,
talk to my bot.
That assumes you're going to get a reaction. How are you going to get, how's your day at school?
It might become bot currency, though, so that you can buy more of certain things that are your wishes over someone else's.
Well, do you guys see multiple bots, multiple personas emerging, like people doing that as well?
Wow, I think you'd have your bot, wouldn't you, that would do your things, and it'd be like, I will buy that thing when it hits a price point, but I'm not going to watch it all the time. I've got better things to do. I want to experience life. But this is, Generation Z, the FOMO generation, the fear of missing out. They want to be doing stuff, but not just slavishly devoting their life to it. So.
Yeah.
Got it. Wendy, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Right. Part of what we talked about too was, when we were trying to predict things, I was thinking about my own children, 3 in Generation Z, and they are growing up in a world where I feel like they are comfortable with all of their stuff being known. I think older people who, we've come into that as we've matured, I'm more private, right? I'm not comfortable with just things being out there, but the younger generation is. And so we were discussing at what point will they care to keep something private, right? And so how do companies engage with them in a way that gives them the amount of control that they need, knowing there's still a generation growing that is more comfortable? And I think it comes back to, you're asking a question about, is this about controlling your profile or not? I think that we as experience makers need to be completely transparent about what we're doing, how we're making offers, and and be open and give people very simple control to really state how much they want to be known or how much we want that to be leveraged. And that will change over time as you've got generations who come up, right? And then we even talked about the generation that comes after Z.
Which
Because,
we couldn't,
new
we couldn't remember what that was called.
Right. Is it A1?
Is it double A or A?
Right. But new technology comes on, people get excited and it goes way over here and there's no regulation and no controls. And the next generation comes in, it's like, let's control it all. And maybe the third one gets to the right balance. So, we're really excited about what will happen as people grow into this and we learn more. And
children naturally rubbish everything their parents did. So the
That's
children
right.
of Generation
That's
Z
the
will say,
pendulum.
you shared everything? Are you an idiot? That's, and they'll clamp down, there'll be nothing. So,
I'm really curious about the question. You mentioned regulation. I'm really curious about the question of how these emerging practices around emerging technology might stave off regulation, or if we feel that it's inevitable given recent news, recent events. I think it's something that we in tech tend not to think too much about, but it's becoming harder and harder to ignore.
Let's do a quick roundtable. Leland, what do you think? Regulation, yes or no, in the next 3 years?
Absolutely.
Okay. Wendy, regulation?
I think yes, regulation, but I also think more of bringing in the idea of open source, sort of community self-regulation.
Okay. Koi, where do you go?
I tend to think some kind of regulation is inevitable.
Okay.
I think balance between an ability to personally regulate something and then have a third party regulate certain things. So some balance in between.
Public-private partnership on regulation?
Yeah.
All right. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, I lean with Leland that there's going to be regulation that comes about. It's not going to take away some of the other controls, but yeah, definitely.
Okay. Cecilia?
I think there'll be a small amount of public regulation, but I think it is up to the companies, to your point, to give a certain amount of control of self-regulation.
Self-regulation. Okay. Cecilia? Kelly, sorry.
Yeah, I agree that there will be some form of regulation. I think being transparent with consumers about what's known about them, how it's being used, and then letting them be part of the equation of how they want to be marketed to and exposed to things.
John?
I think definitely regulations in Europe is already a big thing and it's coming over here. I think companies have got to make the story of why we're collecting all this data. Every emerging technology is an input. We've got to, if you ask customers, say, why are you collecting all this data? They'll probably say, I believe it's because you want to sell me more things.
Yep. Malta?
And-
Right.
I think we're right at the deciding moment of that exact question. I tend to believe there will be some amount of it as well, and I think we should be careful what we wish for. I think the incremental burden that will impose on new like people like us here or people who want to build the next whatever, the compliance burdens can be immense, and then we will be deprived in the long run of something. But of course, it is a balance. It should not be a Wild West in my
I
opinion.
want to jump back to something Cecilia said about self-regulation. Where do you see that happening? So,
I think it comes back to your point, Kelly, about transparency, and the more you know about what kind of data is being collected, being able to access that data, you can decide what you want out there and what you want to be kept private.
so being able to have more management of your own data
Yes.
to do that.
I have children younger than Generation Z, and they do not trust anything online. They're completely locked down. They have to first operate multiple profiles for their different interests and whatnot, and everything's on private and everything's approved.
My kids are the same. They're on tour and they basically have fake profiles for everything.
Yeah.
So it's not because of me.
I was
But it's not
gonna
because of me. It's not because of me.
No parental influence at all there.
All their friends are doing the same thing. So, but yeah. So anything you guys wanted to pose to the group on emerging tech in terms of getting some feedback as to how that makes experience makers successful?
We also talked a lot about mixed reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality, and we have this prediction of by 2030, immersive experiences will be mainstream for consumer, educational, and professional use cases. The idea of, if you think about a shopping experience, it's like try before you buy, right? Even as a woman, I'd be like, what would I look like with short hair? Wouldn't it be great to know that before you go pull the trigger on that? Or even, what would it be like to drive this car on a curvy mountain road? Or even if you think about educational experiences, right? It's about access to experiences that maybe you can't afford, or access it to decide, do I want to pay for it and go do it for real? Because, you know, a virtual reality Tahitian vacation is never going to give you a tan, right? So it's not really going to do it, but it might.
Yet.
Right. That's right.
Depends how bright your screen is.
Yeah. But I guess the question is, you know, what do people think about, you know, augmented reality and virtual reality being an integral thread to educational experiences? Even think about surgical operations, if you can be seen and being guided at the time. Is that really going to be our reality, say, within 12 years?
I think augmented reality is going to hit way faster than that. I think virtual reality, you're right, just the devices, and it's not something that is quite yet understood by all industries where it's valuable, whereas augmented reality, I mean, everybody's walking around with a cell phone that has augmented reality capabilities, right? Oh, just about everybody does. Voice capabilities too, and the idea that you could, and we talked about this kind of crossing over the personalization piece, but turning a physical store into a dynamic experience for you while you shop that's curated to me as an individual, that's not 2030, that's like the next 2 to 3 years. And we're gonna watch those expectations force the market to evolve very fast, and everyone else along with it. So
I totally agree. I think with augmented reality, the lack of friction and also the way it can sort of just slip into our existing patterns of behavior and experiences, like with Apple AirPods, like that's basically, you know, augmented reality, but nobody ever said, hey, check out these augmented reality earbuds, right? They just said, this is a great new way to listen to music on your smartphone. And I think that's the...
How's that augmented reality then? Is it?
It just understands how you're using the devices. It can. There's a chip in there that can really be smart about enhancing the experience of the content that you're consuming. So, you know, there's these little sort of gradations that we don't always notice, and that's how technology slips into the mainstream.
Well, there's an interesting piece around context, right? The location, where you are, presence, all those things that are driving what content is being served up. A lot of these are data-driven, rich experiences. We got a question here actually from, let's see, Jason on Twitter about how does GDPR change the landscape on data-driven experiences? Anybody want to jump in on that? And if for those asking questions, please use the hashtag AdobeTT, and of course on Facebook Live as well.
I think it comes back to transparency, right? It's the responsibility of companies to provide transparency about what data is being collected, what data is being used, and to make it easy for that the consumer to set preferences about that data.
I think the challenge will be that if you say we need to, and with GDPR, one of the things would be that you need to say exactly why you're collecting this data and what you're going to use it for. And that in many cases, the answer will be, I don't know. Like, we're collecting it because if we're going to put AI machine learning on it, then we may see patterns that may give some great insights for that customer down the line, but we don't know until we do it. So there needs to be a trust thing going on with customers to say, we're going to collect a lot of stuff with it, and be comfortable with that and trust us enough to do something that's going to benefit you.
Wow. So we spent a lot of time talking about the emerging technologies that help experience makers. We're going to do a quick lightning round. I want to know what your top technology is for this year. So we're going to break it down to this year, see what you think. So let's start with Leland. What do you think?
Top technology in the VR.
Top technology in general for emerging technologies for experience makers. So are you saying VR, mixed reality, or?
Yeah, I'll say those.
Okay. What do you think, Wendy?
I'm a big fan of AI.
Okay, so you're big on AI?
Voice. I think voice is going to be everywhere, part of every emerging technology.
Voice, all right, Penny?
Oh, I agree with all of them, but
All right,
I would say
all the above? Circle away.
I would say AI for me and my job is going to have the most impact in the next year to 2 years.
Jared?
It's the mixed reality, but it's specifically the augmented reality, because I think what it's going to do is it's going to force us to reinvent things like shopping and stuff, where AI will then come in and service it, and all these other things will kind of follow behind it. But it's going to force us to reinvent things that we have been doing forever. So,
Cecilia?
I would agree with voice and home assistants and just being able to talk to your consumers within their home now.
Kelly?
Really looking at the customer service space and the role of intelligent conversational bots and how to improve that.
Okay. Charles?
Not out yet, or widely out yet, but in testing, been very impressive. I would say 5G.
5G, all right. Live from Mobile
If
World
it
Congress.
was available to everybody, not saying anything,
Game
but
changer.
that would be a real game changer.
Malta?
I'm going to say microservices. We talked about it out there again. The ability to more easily build new experiences and build different things and more quickly react to what users and customers really want, I think has an incredible potential.
All right, real quick. Do we tax robots? Leland?
Do we tax robots? Sure.
Yes? All right, Wendy?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
No, just to be.
No, just to be controversial. All right. Jared?
No, I would expect yes.
You expect yes? All right. What do you think?
Yes.
Yes?
No.
No?
No, ridiculous.
The AI will decide.
The AI will decide. He's got the final word. Malta's got the final word on emerging tech. So we talked a lot about different emerging technologies. I think they're important for experience makers. These are definitely pieces. I think we actually touched on the issue around ethics, about having AI ethics as we get into these technologies where they're transparent, where they're explainable, where they actually have a component where they're reversible. And we talked a little bit about how this could be human-led. I think that's kind of the underlying current here. So let's jump into our next segment, really talking about what's going on in the world of personalization. A very, very exciting segment, really how we bring in content and context and choices and the ability for people to actually make the right set of decisions. So what are the opening statements? What are the predictions that you guys have on this?
All right, I was gonna take this, and then Kelly and Leland were gonna jump in. So, for me personally, I was really excited to see this was a key topic, because for the last 5 years, I've watched this space go from being interesting to becoming like a very ubiquitous, we have to do this in order to compete and win. But I think we're actually at a really interesting pivot point. And what we were talking about was the shift from marketing communications, which is a one-dimensional view, and very heavily from the advertising and marketing kind of heritage, to creating digital conversations where it starts to be two directions. And that changes the frameworks that you actually work within. The other thing we talked about was the shift from prediction to anticipation, right? So because we grew out of advertising and marketing where often you don't have a relationship yet, we sometimes bias the way we do things like service and sales, when in fact, people don't want you to predict for them. Nobody wants Uber waiting outside their house before you call. That's creepy. What you want is the anticipation that when I call for Uber, Uber's available for me when I ask for it on my terms. And
so prediction is creepy. Anticipation is?
It's empowering. It's
Empowering.
as a service. And the reason that's so important is the difference, and we just talked about this a lot, is who's in control. As a brand, if I'm predicting what a customer wants, it means I'm in control and I'm trying to define your customer journey. But when I anticipate, I'm trying to create enough flexibility for you to be in control of your customer journey. And that does create a need for new experiences that, it's one of the reasons I'm big on augmented reality personally. So we talked about that, and interestingly enough, the stuff Giles was starting to talk about a little bit with the personal profile.
Yeah.
One of the big question marks we had was related to an episode of a TV show, I won't name it, but where people had social scores and how that could start to backfire. And so it's interesting, and one of the big questions we had, would we start to see, Uber's an example where they have rider scores, we start to see other brands start to create scores on us as consumers?
We do.
And how would we feel about that?
But I think this exists already.
But are we transparent
Nope.
about it?
That's the,
Well, no, I mean, any
Don't carry it on your
not-
shoulder.
anyone from a financial institution would say we absolutely have scores, and I have a banking background. Then we'd had a prearranged limit that we'd lend to customers, and that was a big discussion a couple of years ago when we said, should we tell customers what it is? And there's a lot of people were going, no, absolutely not. Well, why not? Why wouldn't you tell someone?
And why not? Why did you decide not to?
We decided to.
Oh,
well,
even better.
and this gets back to this, who's in control. If you think about it, I know the topics came up earlier around like data and having that data and making it accessible, and that's something we talked about a lot that we all agreed on. If you're going to collect data on customers, it should be transparent. They should have control over it. And most importantly, it should be a service to them. Because when it's a service to me, I'm happy to share my data. When you're trying to create a new revenue stream off of my data, then the relationship actually breaks down quite a bit. Sure, it's a great way to monetize a new revenue stream, but the relationship starts to diminish. And we even joked about it. It's not just on that sense of selling the data, but how many brands really focus on using promotions to drive relationships? And we were joking, saying if in real life, if you had to always take your friend out to dinner or buy tickets for them to spend time with them, that's not a really great relationship. That may be one you might want to move on from. And so, yeah, focusing on the service side, I think is kind of a lost
Harder to
art.
replicate as well.
I also think it's, as a brand, how you choose to listen to the data you receive from customers. So I had a personal experience with like a personal shopping subscription where I've clearly stated, please don't send me pants, yet I get pants. And so I'm communicating and sharing my preference. I'm doing it in your web form. And then I wonder if the AI and the machine learning is not fast enough to learn that way, but it's how we want to learn as brands. If we want to be a good brand and have a value exchange with the customer, you give me information for a reason, and so I can hopefully create a great experience for you. You've got to have the listening mechanisms that can catch up to the customer as well, or else it's just in kind of
That was the point you made earlier. Like when you've moved on from a subject, does the machine move on? Like when you're very interested in travel to Europe until you have that holiday, and then you're not interested anymore.
But I think all good relationships start with listening. I mean, even between people,
I could not agree
right?
more. Yeah.
And it's hard to listen because there's so much information coming at people.
If you think about it from like a retail perspective, and sorry to bias at that, but you're right, it's 100%. If I go into a place and I go there all the time, first step is pay attention and listen.
Yes.
You shouldn't be saying, oh, well, Jared, given that you're a dad and you have 2 kids and you have this income, you should be saying, oh, that you like these fabrics and these brands and these styles and the way it fits this way and these colors. That's personal, right? But it had to start with listening before you start trying to give me advice and trying to recommend anything else to me. So.
There's an issue too of like, we talk about transparency and letting people understand the kinds of scorecards we're keeping on them, but at some point we're actually adding to the burden of just having the relationship, having to shape the way what we're telling them or what the customer is telling us and how we're listening. So I wonder, I mean, to what extent do we think that customers are going to want to manage individual kinds of relationships with different companies, or is there going to need to be some sort of meta service or a third-party product that helps you manage everything?
I think we are. I think, think of investment management or something. You say like there's all these stocks and shares I could buy. I don't know which one is the best one. Experts.
Yes.
Manage my identity and my data exchange in a way that I control, or I give you guidance and then you do all the complex stuff.
Right.
Because next time someone says, are you comfortable sharing your location?
Yeah.
And you think, I don't know, what are you going to do with it?
There's a civic implication to that, right? Because investment management isn't necessarily a service that's very well distributed up and down like the social spectrum, right? So is it only people of certain means or sophistication going to be able to afford either the money or the time to do that kind of thing?
Is privacy the new luxury?
Yeah, people have asked that. It's a good question.
But to your point about, do you want to share your location right now? I feel like that's almost part of an onboarding experience, is to educate users the benefits of enabling data sharing. And I don't think it's ever communicated. You're just asked, do you want to share it or not?
Yeah, we can't. It's a binary question, and we haven't. You can't easily tell the story of what you're going to do with it. So it's.
Yeah.
I would subcontract.
Sometimes I think it is potentially reasonably obvious through the experience what you need it for, but then what I see a lot is that people just ask the binary question, can I use your location now and forever and ever? It's like, no, I don't want that, but I kind of want the thing now, and I don't want to remember to go back and turn it off, so I end up not using the thing, whereas if you just ask for it for the next 10 minutes, if the product allowed for that, they say, yep, sure, and I could trust, I could trust that you would stop using it after 10 minutes.
Wow.
Maybe this is where we need some regulation. You just asked a very, very deep question that sort of didn't get addressed, and that was, is privacy a luxury? And I think that we have to be careful about, like say people who have lesser means react to offers because they don't have, they want a cheaper price or something.
The inequality of privacy.
Right. And so maybe that's where we need regulation to protect and level the playing field, because we don't want a whole group of people who have to sort of consume things that may not be healthy for them, but they're healthy for the brand. Meanwhile, you've got other people who are able to protect themselves from that, and that's just going to cause other societal problems, and so we have to look out for that.
It's definitely a downstream effect on the personalization side. Any predictions from Kelly, Leland, that you guys have as well? Do you want to add to this?
I thought you brought up an interesting one as we were hashing through some of it of you have a quantifiable self right now and your data profile and what you choose to share with people. At some point, will you see me as a consumer maybe be able to monetize myself?
Right, from quantifiable to monetizable.
Exactly. And you see some influencers doing this now, but that could be the new norm, that I can be in control and almost make money off my own profile. And I think that could be an interesting space that this is going.
What do you guys think about from quantifiable to monetizable self? Want to jump in?
I think it's expressed like that, it sounds incredibly depressing to me. However, if it equalizes the relationship more, such that we can be in a transactional relationship about this. If it's worth money to you, Mr. and Mrs. Brand, then I'm going to charge you for it.
Well, there's a long history of the home being a mini economy within itself, whether it was like at the turn of the century where people raised their own food and made their own clothes and made their own furniture, places of manufacture, to eventually, particularly the wife of the home in the early 20th century being seen as the sort of manager of the home factory. And then in the 90s, you get the idea of the individual adopting the brand ethos and system and saying, well, I am my own brand and now I need to go out and build my own brand. And then that's what ended up feeding a lot of sort of social media activities. So it's only, I think if you just look at that long trend of stuff, it's only, by default that people are going to start figuring out how to monetize themselves, seeing themselves as an economic entity worth value. And they're just now giving away that value for free to everyone else. All that's just needed is just some way of them to monetize it in some way, which, as we've discussed, people are doing in some capacity. But what you can see and what you can control, you can then make money off of, but then you can also, kind of what I just said, you can control. So you start having the monetization conversation, you have the management conversation, you have the privacy conversation, kind of all wrapped up into the exact same trend. And they may all just kind of converge and pop out into a similar solution with each other.
I think we're touching on this issue of privacy and personal data and trying to figure out what that balance is. I think it sounds like what you guys are saying.
This is another interesting, like if every company you had a relationship with published back to you your customer lifetime value and how you may influence it, it could offer you a discount.
Well, I think it's interesting so we always talk about CRM, right? So it's the company's point of view in developing a relationship with you. So that means, because the company is the designer of the relationship, the company's intents, goals, objectives, biases, and stuff like that are built into the relationship. But if you flip it and start talking about, well, I'm an economic entity of which everyone is competing for my attention and my dollars, I'm now managing all of the vendors. So the whole idea of a VRM, a vendor relationship management model. And so all of a sudden, now I'm dictating the terms of the relationship. I'm dictating the service terms. I'm basically flipping the model backwards on you and setting up new protocols and how you interact with me. So I think that has a much different dynamic to it, and where all of a sudden, if I'm managing my own VRM system with all the companies and the providers that are important in my world, I know my lifetime value to a particular company. I don't need another company telling it to me. I think that's part of the empowerment model, that when you bring enterprise level, government level technology down to a very personal level and make it the means and the capabilities of the individual, that's been the natural, that's been the natural path of all technology. How do you take something that's big and gargantuan and put it in a person's pocket so they can listen to music, so that they're in control? So just imagine all the apparatuses that allow businesses to dictate and shape the relationships with their customers being simplified and brought home so that the individual person can then do that to all the companies.
So
I think that would be
So we're tying some interesting themes, the self-regulation piece, the ability to actually monetize that data, the ability to actually control that. And I'm surprised we never even talked about blockchain and smart contracts. It's probably the only event I've heard that we haven't gotten to that point. But I'm saying like people are actually using those as mechanisms. So any other things that, you thought were important personalization that you think are predictions that are going to happen, Leland?
I don't know. I happen to be really big on the whole VRM thing and sort of creating those new protocols with people. So I think you'll you'll see particularly emerging from the data, self-data management platforms, this idea of like, who do I give it to? How much do I value my particular data point for? What are my permissions that I allow you to have it? So I think that's sort of a protean element for a much larger shift over the next 20 years in how people relate to economic entities known as businesses.
Got it. What do you guys think? Are we trading privacy for convenience right now? What's your viewpoint?
Well, I think time is the other thing that is a luxury these days. And so my belief, or for me anyways, to create a good experience for me is somehow to save me time, or get me to the end result that I'm looking for faster.
So we're in an attention economy where we're saving time and capturing people's attention?
I think there's probably apathy in there as well.
There's apathy as well.
So people thinking, I don't know what's happening to all this, and I sort of don't care. Particularly, the generations we were talking about who are quite happy to put a lot out there, and so I don't really care what happens to it.
I kind of agree with that. I think when you say trading convenience for privacy, I think that suggests a conscious intention, and the value of the transaction. I don't know what I'm giving up and what I'm not giving up. I mean, the license agreements are very dense and long, and we don't have time to do it. So you just
check TOS.
Yeah, you just accept.
You got to scroll to the bottom first, but you got to scroll to the bottom. So
scrolling takes.
You talk to your lawyers. Make sure they scroll. Make sure they scroll. So.
And the younger generations are even less aware of what's at stake by giving up their privacy. They might not even understand what the concept of privacy is.
Wow. Are we trading privacy for personalization? Do we know we're consciously doing that?
Well, I actually want to go back to what you said, which I think is interesting, this idea of you don't even know what you're giving up with privacy.
Yeah.
I would argue most of us probably don't either, because privacy has always been like oxygen. Like it's just there, we have it, we've never had to think about it, it's never been threatened.
Yeah.
And so what are we really giving up with privacy? What are we really gaining with giving it up? Those are the types of conversations that we've never had to have before, but all of a sudden all this technology is thrust upon us, and all of a sudden it's not just encroaching on privacy, it's like decimating it in massive ways that we don't even realize quite yet. And so we're trying to make sense of it as it's happening.
Is it a human right? Is it an ethics question where every human has the right to privacy?
Yeah, I've had that conversation with people, and it's a fascinating conversation, and it goes way deeper than you ever think it would once you start getting into it.
And in Europe, it is the right to be forgotten, right?
It's one form, right? But in the UN, we have 30 international human rights, but right number 31 for data privacy doesn't exist yet. Right? It's something people could start campaigning for. Now, we got some interesting questions here from Twitter. Are there boundaries for how much information and data companies should be sharing? Malta, go ahead.
Are there boundaries for how
much information and data sharing there should be for companies should be gathering? So.
Well, yes, absolutely, 100% yes. And I hope there is the possibility for a different kind of relationship than a financial and transactional relationship, because there should be ethics and standards that should not be breached.
All right. Definitely a very strong European view. Anyone for the American view of Canary Islands of privacy, which is kind of what we're living in at the moment. But anyone want to take a different view?
For the record, best of both worlds.
For the record, Giles, what else?
I think privacy. So I think there are limits. I think there are certainly the limits about lifestyle and health information. You could create underclasses of people that struggle to get health insurance or car insurance at a decent price. So I think you would need to be quite careful about what you shared. I mean, we joked that if any cell phone company and car insurance company, if they got together, they would render half their customer base uninsurable because you drive too quickly.
Or maybe our underwriting requirements would change.
Well, yeah, and then the flip side would be the other half who drove sensibly would say, well, then that's an advantage to me. But no, I think there needs to be limits.
Got it. Malta, actually a question from Ross on Twitter, a little riff off your VRM, the DocSearls VRM piece. Would there be a buyer relationship manager where customers manage the relationship and value they give to business?
Sorry, read that one more time.
So the question is, will there be a buyer relationship manager where customers manage the relationship and value they give to business? And a little bit riff on what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I could probably see something like that. I mean, you know, if you, depending on how much you buy into a lot of what McLuhan says, but any new technology is used in the same way as the old technology. So it would be a very quick one-to-one transfer of like how companies do it to how now individuals do it. But I do think that would evolve away over time, particularly with other advances in technologies that take away the labor of having to do that. But absolutely, just having to service it, hire, you know, have people who maybe help you manage that, added service layers on top of that, even to the point we were talking earlier about microservices. You know, you could see companies starting to offer very narrow services that allow them to leverage freelance communities of people who are brought together by things like, you know, Amazon Mechanical Turk or things like that to do these very specific niche activities that you can't build a business around, but you can create real-time value creation for that specific moment. And then in that scenario, yeah, you could hire someone as a business manager for you in your VRM system.
It would be a tech, wouldn't it? It would be. It would have
Yeah.
technology would disintermediate companies.
Yeah.
So you say, I don't have a relationship with you. I have a relationship with the tech that then interfaces with you, and it just changes my electricity supply if there's a cheaper one because I don't care.
Yeah,
Well, it's the natural unbundling of companies. It's, you know, it's
Right.
been happening since the 70s. It's only going to continue as.
So companies would panic because they're like,
Yeah.
I don't have a relationship with this customer anymore. I have a relationship with their manager.
Yeah.
So the aggregation will happen at the manager level. All right, cool, quick, lightning round. I'm gonna jump in here. Personalization budgets, are they going to increase, stay the same, or decrease? I'll start with you, Jared.
Well, they're definitely increasing.
Increasing, all right? Go ahead, what do you think?
I think as customer experience becomes a dominant differentiator for companies, they'll definitely increase.
On the increase side, Koi, what do you think?
Yeah, they're definitely increasing. There's so much left to do in this space, and it's only just begun. And
So personalization has just begun, all right?
Absolutely increasing, because when you look at how AI will help enhance personalization, they go hand in hand.
All right, Leland?
In my world, they will stay non-existent.
They'll stay non-existent in your world?
There'll be marketing gimmicks.
This will be marketing gimmicks.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll screen out for those because you know. All right.
Can I challenge him on one thing?
Yeah, go ahead,
Leland
challenge.
and I were talking about this, is that CPG companies historically don't worry about things like, because they don't have the customer relationship. I agree with you with a caveat, because this is what we're talking about is as, say like a grocery store starts to become very dynamically curated, that I'm looking on the shelf and saying, hey, what can I eat on this paleo diet? And it's showing me things. Not only will the CPG companies have to create better content to support the personalized experience, they're going to want to run targeted ads related to it. You know that, you know, if I'm gluten-free and on a paleo diet and all these other things, your ability to show me the right kind of ad, the right kind of messaging is going to be critical. So I'm not disagreeing with you really, but I'm just saying that I think you're going to be forced into that ecosystem. So.
Did you have a special order at dinner last night
No, we all eat the
for
same.
your gluten-free paleo diet?
No, I'm not actually gluten-free. It was just an example.
Okay.
We all eat the same thing. All right, Paul.
Yes, increase.
Increase, you're on the increase side, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it will expose big bottlenecks within organizations to their ability to produce massive amounts of content and work out what it's doing. So data and content creation will be challenged by it.
All right, Kelly, questions. Experience makers, are they going to increase, stay the same, or decrease their budget?
The content piece has to increase. I think the investment that you would put towards that, because once you've been able to personalize and really target customers and speak to them in a relationship way, you have to have the right content to say that. It doesn't exist right now.
Got it, Cecilia.
Yeah, definitely increased. I think customer expectations have already changed and will continue to change to expect.
So those increasing expectations is actually adding to more need to increase personalization.
Yeah.
So, all right, so majority of us have actually come to the conclusion that budgets on personalization are going to increase unless you can tune it out, which is going to be very interesting. So when you think about personalization, massive, the ability to take context, the ability to actually give people choices, the ability to anticipate what they want to do. I think we learned a lot here in terms of understanding where personalization is headed, the intersection between privacy and personalization, the intersection between how people are going to manage their own privacy, and really what that future is going to look. So I think we had a great session here. Let's talk about what's happening with design-led thinking. One of the top pieces, thinking about experience makers. And so for those of you following, please ask your questions on #AdobeTT, and of course, keep following us here live. So what are the predictions that we have for design-led thinking? What do you guys think?
So one of the things that we talked about is with all the trends in emerging technology, all the things we've been talking about for the past 20 or 30 minutes or so, they all are going to require some really forward-thinking approaches to designing the experiences. And it seems kind of obvious to us that in the next, half decade, it'll be true that any successful company will have design leadership at the executive level, which isn't really the case today. I mean, we've all been talking about how design is more important than ever and has a seat at the table now, but if you look at most companies at the executive level, there's not a lot of design leadership. But when you see it built into the DNA at a company like Airbnb, for example, you can see it's a huge difference maker. And I think that's going to be a real criteria for companies in the near future.
So is that a chief design officer, chief creative officer, or just someone with a design background?
It could be any combination of that. I think it's just, it could be the CEO himself or herself who is deeply steeped in design. It just, there should be somebody who's carrying that torch at the executive level.
That's pretty huge. So what are the predictions you guys have?
One is about words and writing, so that words and writing are going to be an essential design tool moving forward. And that's just with voice, conversational interfaces, the way you talk to people, tone of voice, with empathy too. And I've been hearing how some companies are hiring comedians and improv people to do the writing for them, just to bring a little bit more personality into it and connect and bring that emotional layer to it, which I think is super important.
Wow, what do you guys think about that?
That sounds like it'd be very easy to get wrong.
Yeah, it feels to me the opposite of being genuine. That's like, oh, let's hire a human to make us sound human. No, I think that companies need to be looking for people. Like at Adobe, when we hire people, it goes without saying that you have the expertise and the skills. We look for people with the right EQ, collaborative approach. Being genuine is one of our core values. And so we look for people, and I think businesses need to do that. You shouldn't have to hire EQ. You should have EQ within your DNA. Otherwise, you're not being authentic.
It's not just about the EQ or the authenticity, but that there is, well, on the very practical level, there are simply a ton of deliverables to be made here. Someone needs to go through the big old tree of responses and whatnot. And we strongly believe that that's a design-led, should be a design-led exercise, and it is going to be a key position on any and all good design teams in the near future.
Although I don't think it's one position. Like, I think everyone is going to have a design-led mindset in many ways, whether you're developing the product or you're developing the web experience or the in-person experience. I think that it's probably going to be more incumbent on us to educate all of our employees on how to think design, like how to think customer obsession.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to say, but it's also not reasonable to say that everybody's going to be more of an engineer or more engineering oriented without real engineering leadership. I think you have to have that DNA at the company, and that's usually best embodied in an actual person or a team of people who are out there every day pushing that agenda, urging those priorities forward.
It's interesting. At Accenture, we, our agency's humongous, but the company is much bigger than us. And they're going through a process of doing design-led thinking for the rest of the company to help with basically almost the cultural shift, right? Because you grew up in a world, many of the people, there's people who've been there 30 years, and it was always, hey, if we're going to show up to a client, we're going to say this, we're going to do this, and it's all prepackaged. And then all of a sudden they had to deal with agency people who were saying, no, we have no plan. We're just going to show up in a room, we're going to co-create, and they're like, what? And they're just stressing them out. And part of it was to teach them why you do design-led thinking, and the value of it, so they can start to make that pivot. But you're right; without the leadership, it's a lot harder. There's a cultural dynamic that sometimes pushes against design-led thinking.
You can't have that cultural shift without a real human being embodying it and talking to it and relating to other folks. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, Corey, to your point, it has to be someone in a role of capability and resources to enact change, because I think what people often confuse design with is the color of the drapes. It's always about some sort of aesthetic component to what's going on, and what most people don't understand is whether it's design thinking or other forms of design. Design is the understanding and the implementation of desirable change.
Right.
Basically, you understand the ideal state that people want, you understand the gap between that state and where you are now, and you figure out how to build the bridge between the two.
Yes.
So that requires resources, it requires time and money and changing the way things work and stuff. And so if you have someone in the C-suite who just has the title of CDO or whatever the Chief Creative Officer title, but there's not that, they don't lead a capability for implementing and marshaling resources to enact change, it will be a figurehead role rather than someone who's really going to implement something. So to your point, even if it's the CEO or the CMO or Chief Customer Officer, they will have the proper empowerment to enact design rather than just symbolize design within the company.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Though as a byproduct, the drapes probably will look a lot better as well.
Yes. But to the point, and I think just to build on that, because I do think that's still important, that visualization is still a massively important part of design, because it is the best and clearest way to articulate ideas. It is the grammar of design that allows other people to understand the change and the way change will happen.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. At Adobe, one of the things we've been doing for the past 6 months is trying to move away from product development by way of PowerPoint slides and moving towards a model where we really envision everything, and it's design-led. It's trying to understand what the customer is going to experience so you can see it or hear it or touch it. And I think that's a central tenet of really successfully leading with design.
When would you put customers into that? Would you test stuff really early with them?
Yeah, any and all of the above, like going out and doing the research beforehand, sharing those visualizations with them as they're in progress, coming back to them after they've been tested at scale, and then in sharing on a one-on-one basis to get really qualitative feedback. So there's a lot of
established brands, they struggle with this, don't they? Because they always say we can't put something out there until it's really ready. And then by the time it's ready, we spend so much money on it, then we have to follow through on it because we've spent so much money on it.
But that has to do, go ahead.
The concept of prototyping, and how that can be used in any part of a business, that you can prototype service, you can prototype process, and then you're not investing as much money into it before proving it out.
Just, guess wrong, and fail and stuff.
Just slap beta on it.
Yeah, but if you were like,
you get more forgiveness. It's a beta.
But if you have a real high-end brand or something like that, then or like a car brand or something where you can't just say we're thinking of this, and it doesn't really work properly. And then you'd be looking at a reputational hit.
But I also think that if you make a shift to be design-led and it permeates into the DNA of your company, and that becomes truly how you operate, then you're being more genuine, and I think your audience will start to understand you've changed and my expectations for you have changed. And then I think people like to be involved in that design. And if you go way back, I don't remember how many years ago, when Mercedes was building that first SUV, they went and targeted certain segment of customers and involved them in the design, and it led to amazing pre-sales because they involved people and got them invested. And so I think it's a cultural shift, and then people will forgive you for putting out a beta because you set expectations, and then what they get is they get some of that ownership and pride of helping to design.
They must have asked, they said, how much off-road ability do you really need as you live in the city?
So just to build on that real quickly, because there's an equal but opposite outcome of a brand I won't name, but they wanted to create a new car for college students, and so they worked with a lot of California college-age kids. What do you want? What do you want? What would it look like? What would it do? What would you use it for? And they said, great. And they just put it all into the design. They produced this thing. They thought it was going to be amazing. The average age, I can't say the car or anything, but the average age of the person who bought it was over 60 because it was easy for those people to get in the car because it didn't hurt their hips. So, I think there's this general sensibility that design thinking always outputs amazing innovations just if you involve the consumer in the conversation or the end user in the conversation and development. But it doesn't always, because at the end of the day, while everyone can practice design on some level, not everyone can become a great designer. I can pick up a violin and just start strumming it, but I will never be,
Right.
you
I
know,
think strumming it may be your first error.
playing it with a bow. But,
There we go.
But you know, there is the value of the designer's voice, the designer's abductive thinking, the designer's synthesis of information to make leaps that people can't. What the customer does is it doesn't tell you what to do, it tells you more data than you could get in other ways, and it's up to the designer.
Henry
to figure
Ford
out
model,
how
but I'll go to Cecilia.
make
Go
the
ahead.
amazing
Process and
leap.
validation on the back end.
Yeah.
It was a question that we had discussed a lot. Does the customer know best? And it sounds like there's a lot of argument against that. You can argue for or against it in a lot of ways. They know what they want, and your job is to deliver what they want, but at the same time, they don't know how to get there.
Crowdsourced or guru-driven? So Yelp model or Zagat? What do you guys think?
You can't separate it like that. It's an artificial.
It's not a binary choice.
Yeah, it's fluid.
Use
So
both
like,
as a technique.
It's not that the customer knows best or doesn't know best. It's just the customer knows what they need, and I think it's up to the designer to understand the patterns, but also read below the language to understand the latent needs of what that person or that group of people wants, and then try to figure out how to build towards that latent need with that emotional experience that that person wants but doesn't know how to ask for.
So I have a question for you, Leland, because obviously the role you have proves that your company truly values design. But I would argue that there's still the majority of brands do not. Not to the level they think they do, which is amazing to me because everybody knows a bad design when they have an app on their phone that they never use anymore because it's such a nightmare, whether they rate it or not. They know a bad design. Yet I still historically, a lot of people see design. I love the way you described it because it really isn't so simple as do I use customers, do I not? There is talent, that really make a difference in the quality of design. Any advice, me personally, I mean, as we go down doing things, it's too often we're going, can we just not, can you just do the design and then we'll pay you to build it kind of thing? You're like, what? The design is actually the important part. If that's not done right, it's such a waste. And yet, too often, design is seen as the throwaway.
Well, strategy is design, because every decision you make in strategy eliminates a whole sphere of possibilities of how something could be brought to life. And a lot of people mistake that, well, we just need to figure out the strategy first, and then we'll let the creative people or the designers or whatever squeeze in the work production work they have to do at the end, because that's not as important. But what they may end up finding is that what was possible because of that strategy actually wasn't that great. And so that means that the strategy was no longer good. So like what we do, and what I've done throughout most of my career, is see strategy as a hypothesis that needs to be paralleled with creative development. So regardless of whatever you're trying to do, frameworks and formulas cannot reveal everything that you need to know about a situation or fully encompass the full map of possibility. You have to develop creative objects and things to look at and touch and feel and play with on the side of it to unearth new ideas, new conversations, to make leaps to the adjacent possible that you couldn't see looking at a formula or a best practice or a benchmark. And only when those two things are happening in parallel with each other and are co-evolving with each other do you end up with something very positive at the end. And then once you frame design that way, you understand that design is not a creative production, make it pretty thing at the end of the line. You understand that design is fundamentally the entire process.
Well, and it loops back to the...
Is conveniently speaking all of my points too. I'll just say that so further to that is that literally everyone who makes a decision in your company, which is almost literally everyone, are a designer in some form. They're not the only designer required, as is the art director, the graphic designer, the only designer required. When you design your pricing strategy, when you decide on your pricing strategy, you are designing your pricing. And indeed, you can think of, from a modeling or Excel spreadsheet point of view, a beautiful pricing strategy that is not possible to communicate to another human being or is not possible to make desirable to another human being. So while it's great for the model, it's not great in the real world.
Wendy, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say what Leland was talking about kind of brings us full circle to, you maybe need a chief officer who can then break down silos between organizational structures because, strategy has to be one and the same with creative design, one and the same with the data you look at and the insights that get circled back. And so breaking down the organizational silos is really important to truly become design-led.
Chief Cooperation Officer.
That's right.
Wait, is that the CEO? No, I was kidding. Anyways, we had a question from Twitter that's actually very interesting. Where does diversity and inclusion fit into design-led thinking when we're talking about recognizing emotion and voice, as example? How about a customer with autism who may not emote? So this question from Jenny on Twitter. Anybody want to jump in on this?
I actually have one thought that maybe addresses a little bit of that, and it's just that idea that when you are designing products, even let's say artificial intelligence, if all of your developers are from the same background, then they're building their values into the machine values, and that means that we're going to exacerbate the problem of products for the masses being built by the few. And so you need diversity even in how you build and how you think about building things in order for a diverse set of values to be able to be executed through whatever it is that you're building in order to serve a body of customers that looks like the real world.
And I want to jump in too real quickly. Like, we often think about diversity in traditional senses that are more demographic, but I also think it's really important to have a diversity of disciplines, right? Taking an artist, an anthropologist, an engineer, an architect, putting them together because they're trained differently, right? Mm-hmm. And the point of design thinking is really about uncovering or unlocking solutions to questions you never would have asked. And that's how you spur the innovation when different people are attacking the problem from different directions. We got a question here from Brian on Facebook. How do designers understand the needs if personal profiles are highly managed? And would designers create experiences based on fake data? Anyone want to jump in on that one? Tying together our questions on personalization, privacy, managing our data, and some of those technologies.
Is the question saying that you're designing for people that don't really exist?
You might not be designing for a preference or a...
You're talking about the practical art of creating the comp with on the page with the profile page. Well, the answer is yes, definitely. You need to use real data, and then you're not designing one thing. You're designing a container that fits a multitude of things. So you need to have a design system set up such that you can actually see your work with real data. Never ever Lorem Ipsum or John Smith anything.
There's another aspect here, though. We keep talking about giving customers, people tools to manage their personal data, and there's been relatively little work done in this right now, and it's still kind of like a hypothetical use case or hypothetical user. So in some sense, like if you look at certain products, their settings, the ability to opt in and opt out of certain notifications or emails, you look at those. That's not a real person who would ever want to spend their time checking things on and off. And I think that's
literally
important.
a checkbox having that page rather than.
But that's what the bot's for.
Yeah.
That's what the bot's for, right? The bot's going to go choose the preferences I need.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's also why rapid testing and optimization is so important, because it's only as good as the information that comes in.
Yeah.
And if you can combine that design-led thinking at early stage, so you're not at the end game where you find out you've just manufactured a car that didn't actually deliver what you wanted, but you can test it multiple times along the way.
I think this question was digging into the fact that we're modeling off data that people have offered themselves and have offered it fake data.
So if you were doing that,
it's like this person actually isn't a multimillionaire with homes. That's their construct that they've thrown out there, and we're personalizing to someone that doesn't exist. Is that what they're saying?
Oh, I checked 20 to 25 because it gets the best offers.
Right. Yeah. And it's true, isn't it?
It's true.
Well, I have to agree. This point about experimentation that Penny brought up, I do think from a design-led experience, too often the experimentation isn't factored into it, and it needs to be a true data-driven experimentation, because everything from, sure, someone has a brilliant idea about how the layout of the experience should be, but it's not until the consumers start to interact with it that you really know what works. Too often, that the car actually is not being bought by the people you thought. That does not mean the car's a failure. It just means that you need to evolve the whole thing. And I think even with these experiences, just because there's always people gaming the system, just because they're in there doing that, it's not the problem. The question is what actually works and what doesn't. And we're in digital. I mean, it used to be, you'd send the snail mail and you would hope that within a couple months you knew if something worked on your catalog, and then you could use it next year. And then it was email and you'd have to wait 30 to 60 days to know. In digital, it's not like that. We can learn so much faster.
Every action is a demand signal,
Yeah.
right? You get to adjust, you're saying?
As a designer, I think we've always created these user personas to design to. And now it's about balancing that user persona that you as a brand define with the actual real users coming from data. So if you develop your own persona of who you want your audience to be, and you balance that with who your audience actually is currently, then you can kind of create a balance of
Would
what
Generation Z people
yeah.
run out of the room screaming if you've tried to put them in a persona? Because that's apparently the thing that they hate the most is like, do not categorize me.
Well, I think the persona is based off of who your future user is, not so much your current user. The data is telling you who your current user is, but you need to develop a persona of who the future user is.
They're in a cliche persona, the chicken versus egg.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point, and I agree with you, because you need the personas to start to think through the design process, but that doesn't mean at the end you're actually saying, you sit in this segment.
You are that.
Yeah.
They continue to iterate, right? These personas are going to iterate, they're going to evolve, they're going to have half-lives, right? We're going to see a complete, people are going to market towards the half-life of a persona, right? This one's fading out, but a new one's emerging, right? And you've got the data in front of you, so you can start segmenting, saying, oh yeah, 30% of this persona has evolved and shifted to a different persona. We're going to call these something else, right? I mean, it's dynamic, so we're going to see lots of things.
We did joke about it, though. We and Kelly and we have this silly video, but it shows what it would be like if you profiled someone in real life.
Yeah.
If you walked into a retail store and they're like, oh, hey, Jared, given you're this age, it would be very offensive. It would be like a public relations nightmare, but we often
What if you
think
tried
that-
to do it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it would it's what we consider best in class, and it's again because from advertising and marketing that does make sense. When I don't know you, often we'll make assumptions about someone to try to get the best communication. But once we have a relationship, if you treat me that way, it really could be very offensive.
The wrong side of creepy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So back to your original point, really about anticipating versus predicting.
Yeah.
So it's that sequence of events that you serve up.
There's this, it's funny. I don't mean to go back to the personalization topic, but the other thing we talked about was personalization in general is not personal yet. There's a huge gap between what it means to be personal, but what you should be trying to do is replicate the best personal experience. You go into a store and you're shopping for something, somebody listens to you. They're there to help you, not cross-sell you. I mean, cross-selling is a great metric and you should absolutely have it, but it should never be the goal. The goal should be making it easier for people to get what they want on their terms, to make them feel more confident in the decisions they make. But too often we get tied up into the metrics and we end up creating experiences that aren't actually personal at all. They're just kind of gaming the system. And you end up losing your best customers in the long run. In the short run, you're just simply, making the metrics look a little prettier.
A question out to all of you. Can you engineer design-led thinking experiences, or do they come natural?
You engineer them?
Can you engineer them, or do they come natural?
You mean like a
I think you have
like
to.
a workshop? Like an engineered a design-led thinking experience?
Not more like a workshop, but will they automatically be served up with systems, with AI systems in the future?
Oh, can you automate them?
Right.
Oh, can you build them?
Certain
Probably inform them.
process you can automate
So you believe in the automation?
certain parts,
certain
not
parts?
not every single part
every
of the
part.
design process.
What do you think, Kelly?
I think the struggle is something you were just saying is like, who's the protagonist in the story? And I think it's often very easy to say, oh, my design's the protagonist, and we lose that the customer is actually the protagonist. And it's like helping them achieve what they want to do, not what product and how do I cross-sell
So
that.
push versus choose.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Push versus pull. Go ahead. What do you think, Giles?
So I think that there's two, in terms of organizationally, did you say can you create this sort of design environment? Was that
No,
it?
I think it was really about the experiences customers are going to experience. Is it design-led, right? Is it engineered in that sense, or is it organic? So from an automatic AI kind of perspective.
I think it's probably design-led and it's probably iterated.
Iterated over time. Okay, so one big A to X, not an A-B, but an A to X test. Okay, what do you think?
If automation and AI is about picking one solution among billions, then I don't think there are usually not billions of design-led solutions to a single problem. So I guess my answer is no.
Okay, all right. Leland, what do you think?
If I'm understanding the question properly, I think it's impossible because design the idea of automating design is a fundamental misunderstanding of what design is and how design works. Design is an integrating function to make creative leaps towards possibilities that are unprovable. And a computer can only do what you tell it to do. And for it to even get close to the idea of performing design, what goes on in a trained designer's head would require very sophisticated general AI, which I would find to be very difficult to build. And given how computers are built now, I don't think a computer could actually crunch that stuff in a comparable time to the way a really high quality designer could do in like 20 minutes based on the data that they've been presented.
You hope.
In a joking fashion, with quantum
Yeah.
computing, no, I was kidding.
Well, once it's proven, yes.
Once it's proven.
Once it's proven, quite possibly, but for what we have right now, my understanding is that we're kind of at the limits of what computing technology can do.
Got it. No, I get it. Okay, Wendy, what do you think?
When I talk about design-led thinking, or when I think about that, I think about it more in terms of designing something with the customer in mind. Instead of saying, I have this product, I want to show it to you. It's like, what do you need? And so I think that you can organically create, through the use of technology, an experience that's designed for that customer in that moment. Again, it's through listening. Maybe you use AI, maybe you pull on microservices to assemble the thing that's going to best meet that person's need at that moment. Can you use technology to do that? Yes.
Got it. All right, what do you think, Coy?
I think that the limits of what AI can do are going to really surprise us. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything that if there's any result that technology can produce that can't be made better with human intervention or human intention added. So even with AI at its best, I believe that you're going to want a designer, you're going to want a person with a design frame of mind really making sure that is going to be the maximum of its potential.
All right.
Well, I believe that design has to be woven through everything you do, and that's one of the reasons why I believe we need to empower everyone to have that capability. So I think creativity, frankly, will always be a human thing. And so I agree, you can use AI to make it more efficient or to get you more information, but I do think that the art is not programmable.
So humans will still have a job, especially on design. All right, Jared, what do you think? Last word.
I couldn't agree more with that last comment. You're not going to replace artists with AI. Most AI is you think like sheep versus shepherd. Most AI is about pattern finding and seeing what everybody agreed to. It's not the shepherd of going in new directions. And you talk about design and talent, and it's why design is so important. No, I mean, we barely understand our own brains, much less trying to replicate an artist kind of mindset. So.
All right, well, quick lightning round. Share one of your lessons learned in design-led thinking, some advice that you'd give to people, things that they should focus on for the year. I'll start with you, Kelly.
I think there's the tipping point of including the customer, but also not sacrificing your brand and your design principles. So I think your car example is a great one. You end up with something that doesn't ultimately meet the needs of the target customer. It can become kind of a dog's breakfast. So you have to be true to your design principles and to your brand principles and strike that right balance in customer listening.
All right, Cecilia.
Similar to what was just said, it's maintaining a strong point of view throughout testing and iterating and understanding how you can learn from failure and adapt your designs to it. But then if something performs really, really well, is that your golden ticket that you stick with, or do you continue ideating and innovating?
So to hold to my brand promise and brand mission, or do I change it because I see something that's interesting?
Yeah.
All right, so there's still some human intervention. Jared.
For me, it was the separation of the what and the how. I think somebody mentioned that too. It's too often you miss out on design-led thinking efforts because instead of understanding the what, we've already jumped to the how, and we go right into doing it, and you miss out on fantastic opportunities if you can separate the two out and do it right.
So not spending enough time on empathy, trying to understand the situation, and jumping straight to the solution is part of the problem.
It's very seldom you see somebody bring the what issue without the solution somehow baked into it. And all of us, we all have to kind of learn to separate those two out. It's just a different way of thinking.
Got it. Penny, what do you think?
I think a good design shows respect for your customer. You either respectful of their time or respectful of what it is that they desire. And so it makes it a very fundamental element to everything that
You know, our survey data says respect is probably one of the top engagement things that people are expecting from a brand as well. What do you think, Coy?
I'll just relate an anecdote about creating a product that's still in development. We released it in beta, and I went to talk to some customers about how they were using it. And not only had the whole team embraced it, but they had pushed a certain feature way beyond what we expected and used it in a completely unexpected way. And that was really, really surprising. It was definitely one of my favorite experiences with the whole design-led process.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I think that it's really important to sit kind of in the middle between what are my business objectives, what do my customers need, and be aware of all the surrounding context, right? Your market, your competitors, history, whatever. And you design with knowledge in the middle of that.
All right, Leland.
I think one of the most interesting things for me, and I think for other people to wrap their heads around, is there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's been developed over the last 15 years around different protocols for how to get work done and how to digest and synthesize and output all of this information that we're now hit with in this complicated and complex world that we live in, where problems are cross-cutting across organizations and so on. Everything from design thinking to agile to lean manufacture to growth hacking and all that type of stuff. And I think it's really important for people to begin to understand how those things plug into each other, and how, you know, design thinking ends with something that leans into agile, and what that then feeds into the next one, so that you can kind of get a sense of how these things complement each other and are not overlapping and not competing with each other. Because truly, as you move through this process of taking something from a complete loose, ambiguous problem that you don't know how to solve to all of a sudden it's something that's in market that you're trying to scale and drive revenue on, what you need to do along the way is very, very different. There's not like one process from one discipline that just sums it all up. And I think sometimes for marketing purposes, these different disciplines, whether it's agile or design thinking, are pitched as these like, save all, just do this, and all of a sudden everything will grow for your company and it will be amazing. It's not. Each of these things solve one sliver of the total process of creating something remarkable in the world.
So take a holistic approach and a systems design thinking approach to it.
Yeah, very much a systems design thinking. I mean, I think everybody would benefit from learning complexity dynamics and systems design.
Got it. Malta.
I'm thinking still, and every day thinking a lot how everyone in our company is a designer, really. So many people are making immensely powerful and important decisions on the experience that our users and our customers are seeing, and I want to and need to find ways to both help them and leverage that.
So empower the organization to have a design-led thinking, a mindset. Mm-hmm. Okay, Giles, last word.
I think digitally, 80% of everything you do won't work in the way you think it's going to, and be enabled to deal with that.
Okay, so learn how to fail and
Not
react
fail.
quickly.
Not necessarily fail. I mean, just won't work in the way you think it would have done.
Okay, so anticipate that things aren't always the way you design.
To enable to be working that way is lots of things. You know, it's being able to measure to find out that was it. It's being able to, have the agility to change direction. I mean, there's a whole load of skill sets that companies need to have to just be ready for that reality.
All right. Well, hey, we're coming to the end of our Future of Experience Makers session here at Adobe Think Tank, live at Las Vegas, here at the Freshwater Studio. And what I really want to do is capture your final thoughts, give us your final statements, what you think from not just the emerging technology side of the house, what's happened on personalization, and also design-led thinking. Any quick comments and thoughts on your end? So, anybody want to jump in? Go for it, Jared. Looks like you're ready to do it.
Oh, no, I was hoping somebody else was going to jump in.
You hope everyone's to jump in? All right.
I'll jump in.
All right.
I mean, I think it's really nice to sit and talk about this stuff from like a range of different perspectives, because I think so often, and this is not a new thought, but technology is assumed as a good thing and a thing that must be distributed and so on. But as we suggested earlier with the privacy thing, there's lots of philosophical, ethical, and fundamental questions that get opened up about it. that I think needs a lot more debate. And I think if there were more forums or even, technology ethicists that were really brought more into the forefront of the conversation, I think actually not only would the development of technology be enhanced, but I think it would be also very interesting just to have a different type of conversation about technology than we have been over the last 20 years.
Should it be done versus just could it be done?
Yeah.
The discussion.
I always think about change, and you're saying this a little bit, Leland, that everything from culture is connected, right? Culture, social, technological, economic, political. You make a change in one area, it's going to impact the others. And I think that we have so many exciting things happening in technology today. We do just need to be very thoughtful about the downstream impacts and be planning for that in order to design the technological future the way we really want it to be.
Yeah, we have a futurist framework that takes into account a systems approach, thinking about, it's a pestle approach that we use typically when we look at implications, and I think if we apply more of that, that would be useful. Anybody else want to jump in? Final thoughts? Cecilia? Sorry, go ahead.
Just from the conversations today, it's interesting how it's become apparent that just by living and existing, we're offering services, and those services need to be managed, and we're turning into our own businesses, and technology is going to have to help us manage ourselves.
Wow, every person is a service and offering.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
I would just say one of the themes here is that we're moving away from this world where everything around business or around experiences are fully quantifiable. We're moving away from being able to ask solely, does it work? Is it profitable? What are the numbers? And we're moving into a much grayer area now where the questions are really around, is it good? Is it good for our customers? Is it good for the community? Is it good for the world? It's much less quantifiable. It's much more qualified. And I think that's a really interesting and potentially dangerous and also potentially amazing new era for us.
And some brands are actually embodying their mission and purpose into that ethos of that experience. Right, and we're seeing that. Anybody else? Final thoughts?
I think there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly in everything, and I think we're all here for the technology of good, but then we all need to just recognize that there's, some bad that comes out of it and some really, really ugly things that come out of it. When I think of bullying as example, which used to be a human-to-human issue, but now is a technical issue. And so I think it's good for us all to be obviously still driving technology for the good, but to be respectful of what the bad and the ugly could look like.
Wonderful. Any other last thoughts? Anyone want to jump in? All right, well, you got one?
Well, I like the way that the collaboration between all different bits is really, really important. I think that it'll be really interesting to see how bigger companies, where they're more siloed in their approach, work with smaller companies and allow them access to data or facilities and say, you build it for me.
Wow. Hey, we are at the dawn of a new era, right? We see the technologies and emerging tech coming through. We talked about how AI is playing a role. We talked about mixed reality, microservices, things that are popping up, voice, right? When we talked about what's happening in personalization, we covered the issue around what's happening with how we use our data, how we anticipate it, how privacy plays a role, how much we're going to give off, right? And when we talked about design-led thinking, we talked about the need for this to be at the board level in terms of a decision, at the executive level, trying to incorporate this in all areas, democratizing design-led thinking so that people can actually jump in, and of course, to have an ethos and mission and purpose. We are live here at the Adobe think tank. This is talking about the future of experience makers with some of the top experience makers in the world, with a live studio audience here at Freshwater. You're following us on Adobe, on the hashtag AdobeTT. We're also pre-Adobe Summit, so if you're here, please definitely enjoy the event. And big round of applause to our social influencers in the back. And thank you. And this concludes this Adobe think tank. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.